Did you know the first true Book of the Dead was not a book at all, but a set of glowing green words hidden inside a ruined pyramid? Imagine standing deep in the Pyramid of Unas at Saqqara. The air is still. The ceiling presses low. A single torch beam slides across the stone. And then the walls come alive. Lines of tiny hieroglyphs, painted a ghostly green, crawl over the limestone like a code. They cover ceilings, door frames, even the inside of the burial chamber. Yet no mourner, no procession, no curious visitor was ever meant to stand here and read them. For thousands of years, most of us were taught that pyramids are just giant gravestones, monumental ego projects for megalomaniac kings. But old legends tell a different story. Here, in these cramped, sealed chambers, Egypt's priests carved thousands of words of sacred spells in places designed never to be seen again. Why inscribe a secret library where the doors would be blocked forever? Why hide the earliest Book of the Dead in the one place no living eyes were supposed to look? This is where the simple tomb story begins to crack. To the priests, the pyramid was not just a coffin of stone, it was a kind of vault. A vault for a curriculum. Every wall a page, every column of signs a lesson in how to die properly. These were not decorations for the living. They were an invisible script for a journey after death, a script only one being was officially allowed to perform: the king. Today we call these inscriptions the pyramid texts. They are the oldest large religious corpus on earth, older than the famous Book of the Dead by many centuries. More than 700 separate utterances carved into the pyramids of Unas, Teti, Pepi, and other pharaohs. According to the stories, only the pharaohs and a very narrow circle of high priests were even allowed to know these words existed. No public readings, no temple walls, no papyrus scrolls for ordinary people. So what kind of knowledge was locked in here? These are not gentle prayers, asking for a peaceful rest. They read like a technical manual for the soul, step-by-step commands for opening gates in the Duat, passwords for passing terrifying guardians, instructions for transforming the dead king into a shining star among the gods. Some spells describe dismemberment and reassembly. Others speak of the king eating the gods to absorb their power. Most importantly, these forbidden inscriptions hint at what the priests believed would happen in the first shocking minutes after death: a plunge into darkness, confusion, voices, gates, tests. If we follow their words line by line, can we reconstruct that journey? Can we use this hidden script to see the afterlife the way an ancient initiate might have seen it? We'll find out together by stepping into the pyramid texts and listening to what the dead were never meant to tell the living. Here, we explore the mysteries, history, and forgotten lore of ancient Egypt, slowly and calmly, and drift off while learning about one of the most fascinating civilizations in human history. From the pyramids and hidden chambers beneath the sands, to the gods, pharaohs, and ancient stories carved into temple walls along the Nile. If you enjoy relaxing history like this, consider subscribing and joining us for more journeys into the ancient world. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's return to the sands of Egypt. What did the priests know that we don't? Those words were not meant for us. They were meant for a dead king, alone in the dark, with only the carved voices of his priests to guide him. But why only him? Why were these spells, these utterances, locked to pharaohs and a handful of royal women? What kind of knowledge was so charged that it could be written on stone, yet hidden from every farmer, craftsman, and scribe outside the palace? And, most importantly, what did the priests think would happen if the script of the afterlife escaped their control? Did you know that for thousands of years no common Egyptian ever saw the pyramid texts? They were not copied onto papyrus. They were not read in marketplaces. They were buried in narrow chambers deep inside the pyramids of Unas, Teti, Pepi, and their successors, where only ritual specialists were allowed to enter. According to the stories carved there, a single mispronounced name could mean annihilation in the Duat. Imagine what that implies about letting untrained people experiment with these words. When we hear forbidden, we often think of censorship, bans, and burned books. But old legends tell a different story here. In ancient Egypt, forbidden usually meant ritually restricted. Certain names of gods were whispered only at dawn. Certain images were drawn only in inner sanctuaries. Some rituals were performed once a year in total secrecy because they were believed to bend reality itself. The pyramid texts sit at the top of that hierarchy, not casual prayers, but precision instruments. To the priests, these were not just beautiful hymns. They were technical sequences, passwords for gates, coordinates for star worlds, commands that told the king's bar where to fly, which guardians to appease, which rivers of fire to avoid. If a spell could open a gate, could the wrong person open the wrong one? Were the priests protecting the living from forces they barely controlled, or were they protecting their own role as gatekeepers of the afterlife? In this episode of our Mystery Schools of Egypt series, we'll find out together by treating these walls as more than funerary decoration. We're going to walk step by step through the hidden corridors of the Old Kingdom pyramids. We'll listen to key utterances from Unas and Pepi, decode lines that speak of the king becoming a star, and examine the shocking spells where he eats the gods to absorb their power. Are these just formulas for a royal burial, or the syllabus of an ancient mystery school? Throughout this series, we blend archaeology, philology, and mythic imagination to reconstruct how initiates might have understood death and transformation. So in this chapter, we will not stand outside as tourists. We will think like a temple scribe, like a newly dead initiate. If it were your heart about to be weighed, what would you need to know, word for word, to survive that first plunge into the Duat? Keep that question close, because as we enter the pyramid of Unas, the first lines we meet are not comforting. They are commands. From stone tombs to stone classrooms, the first command carved for Unas is simple and terrifying. Wake up. We step down into his pyramid at Saqqara, into a stone box that used to be filled with darkness. For thousands of years, these chambers were sealed, the greenish hieroglyphs pressed up against silence. On the surface, the pyramid looked like a ruined hill of limestone, but inside, the walls had become a speaking mouth. Did you know that, in the textbooks, these monuments are usually described in just a few flat words? Royal tombs, funerary complexes, cones of stone aligned to the North Stars and the rising sun, built to secure the king's memory and status. Unas, in the late 5th dynasty, around 2350 BCE. Then Teti, Pepi I, Merenre Pepi II, in the 6th dynasty, all strung along the Saqqara Plateau-like stations in a royal graveyard. Before Unas, the Great Pyramids were mostly mute on the inside. Smooth corridors, plain stone. The focus was on the outer form, the blinding white casing, the causeways and temples, where rituals thundered under the open sky. The inner chambers were quiet, more architectural than textual, like a stage waiting for a play that had not yet been written. But old legends tell a different story about what these places were really for. Ancient Greek visitors whispered that Egyptian temples guarded secret libraries. Clement of Alexandria spoke of 42 sacred books, a whole curriculum of hidden knowledge, hymns, astronomy, medicine, rituals. Later Arabic writers described pyramids and underground passages as labyrinths where forbidden books and strange instruments were stored, accessible only to a few. According to the stories, these were not just graves, they were schools. So what changed when the priests began carving the pyramid texts inside the stone? Suddenly, the burial chamber is not only a container for a body, it becomes an inner sanctum classroom. Every surface is covered in utterances that map the journey through the Duat, through gates and guardians, through dismemberment and reassembly, until the king rises as an Akh, a shining being and a star. Imagine standing there as a priest of Unas. The green glyphs around you are not decoration. They are a frozen voice, a script for rituals that had to be spoken flawlessly. The walls themselves are the teacher, reciting what to do when the sky turns upside down, when serpents of fire appear, when the heart is weighed and cannot lie. But what really happened in these chambers while the king was still alive? Were these texts only meant for a dead pharaoh, or did they double as a training manual, a rehearsal script for initiates learning to die before death? If these pyramids were instruments of transformation, then every design choice becomes a question. Why this angle? Why this star alignment? Why carve the most powerful afterlife spells where almost no living eyes would ever see them? Most importantly, what kind of knowledge were the priests protecting by burying it in stone? We'll find out together when we listen closely to what the first spells actually say, and to the one text that dares to feed the king with gods. Who was allowed to hear the words of the Duat? Most of us picture ancient Egyptian religion as a kind of national ceremony everyone shared equally. Temples, festivals, mummies, and prayers for the dead. But old legends tell a different story. Hidden behind the public rituals was a razor-thin line of people who were allowed to hear the deepest words of the Duat. Did you know the pyramid texts were not written for Egypt as a whole, but for one person, the king? In the late 5th and 6th dynasties, that circle widened only slightly. A few queens, royal mothers, and later some princes. Around them, a tiny ring of high priests and scribes of the mortuary cult, trained for years in the royal mystery schools. No merchants, no farmers, no village healers or minor officials memorizing these utterances in the back rooms of local shrines. For thousands of years, ordinary Egyptians still lived in a sacred world. They watched temple processions from the courtyards, catching glimpses of gilded barks as hidden statues passed by. They heard hymns echo across the city during festivals, smelled incense drifting from inner chambers they would never enter, and wore simple amulets with short protective spells. A few lines against snakebite, a name of a god to guard a child. But what really happened in the king's pyramid was different. Inside those stone corridors, the texts form long, intricate sequences, hundreds of utterances, mapped like a secret route through darkness. These were not casual prayers. They were technical scripts. According to the stories, each phrase had to be spoken with exact pronunciation, exact rhythm, in the right chamber, at the right moment of the funerary rites. The written signs on the walls were like a frozen echo of a performance almost no one was allowed to hear. And the goal for this elite circle was not just a pleasant afterlife in a celestial field of reeds. It was apotheosis. The king is hailed as an Ach, an effective, luminous spirit, rising to join the imperishable stars that never set. He sails with Ra in the solar bark at dawn, then fuses with Osiris in the regenerative depths of the underworld at night. One being, moving through two opposite poles of divinity. Now imagine yourself as a young priest in training at Saqqara. Night has fallen. Torches flicker against smooth limestone. You stand before the sealed door of the king's pyramid, knowing that beyond it, every wall is covered in words you have copied on ostraca, but are forbidden to recite outside the proper rituals. You feel the weight of those unspoken sounds pressing through the stone. What kind of knowledge are you guarding? You have been warned. These utterances shape the king's fate for eternity. A misplaced word could confuse his bar at a gate. A leak to the uninitiated could twist powerful rituals into chaos. This was not just a breach of temple protocol. It was a cosmic risk. But what exactly did those words say that made them so dangerous to share? The scribe who catalogued the gods, ancient source anchors. To answer that, we have to leave the dark of Unis's burial chamber and step into another kind of archive, the memories of ancient scribes who tried to catalogue the gods themselves. Did you know that, in the 3rd century BCE, an Egyptian priest named Manetho sat in a temple and wrote a history of his land for a Greek king? He was not just telling stories. He was drawing on temple records, king lists, and, according to the stories, shelves of sacred books that only initiated priests were allowed to see. Greek and Roman writers hint at what those shelves contained. Plutarch, Diodorus Siculus, and later Clement of Alexandria speak of Egyptian sacred books divided into strict categories: ritual manuals, astronomical tables, and theological mysteries. Some were carried by lower-ranking priests, dealing with incense, hymns, and daily offerings. Others, locked away in inner chambers, were reserved for high priests of the great gods and for the pharaohs themselves. Clement even describes 42 official books of wisdom, volumes on cosmology, law, medicine, the movement of the stars, and the precise words of the rituals. Imagine a hidden curriculum laid out in scrolls. Each rank of priest allowed to open only certain gates of knowledge, each promotion granting access to a deeper chamber of the temple library. According to the stories, later temples held dozens upon dozens of such scrolls. There were books of hymns to be sung at dawn, books of the sky describing constellations and decans, books of the underworld mapping the Duat, and technical handbooks for embalming, initiation, and training new priests. This was not random superstition. It looks like a structured, graded system, a mystery school in written form. But here is the time-bending twist. Manetho, Plutarch, and Clement lived more than 2,000 years after the first pyramid texts were carved for Unas. For thousands of years, between that old kingdom stone and those late temple libraries, Egypt kept layering and guarding sacred knowledge. Different ranks, different rooms, different levels of initiation. What kind of knowledge demands that kind of protection for so long? Most importantly, could this pattern reach all the way back to the very first spells on the pyramid walls? When we look at Unas's pyramid, we do not see random prayers. We see over 700 utterances, arranged in deliberate sequences around the sarcophagus and along the corridors, like chapters of an invisible book. It feels less like decoration and more like the stone fossil of an earlier oral curriculum, once whispered from master to disciple in the temple schools before it was ever cut into limestone. Later ages spoke of books of the Duat and books of breathing, papyrus guides meant to help ordinary people navigate the afterlife. But what really happened before those manuals appeared? Is it possible that the pyramid texts are the royal archaic prototype, a secret syllabus for the king's journey, so powerful that only pharaohs were allowed to enroll? If that is true, then the scrolls of later centuries might be echoes of a far older course in dying, rebirth, and becoming a star. We'll find out together by following how those stone spells began to leak out of the royal tomb and into the coffins of others. Cracks in the stone. How modern science reopened the pyramids. Those stone spells did not stay hidden forever. The pyramids themselves began to crack. In the late 1800s, explorers at Saqqara forced their way into ruined mounds that barely looked like pyramids anymore. Imagine crawling through piles of collapsed limestone, dust choking the air, only to drop suddenly into a cool, silent chamber. Their torches hit the walls, and everything changed. Floor to ceiling, every surface was covered in hieroglyphs, not pictures for the public, tight, vertical columns of sacred speech. Some signs still stained a faint, ghostly green. Did you know that green was the color of rebirth, the hue of Osiris and living plants after the Nile flood? Those priests had literally painted resurrection into the stone. In the pyramid of Unas, then Teti, then Pepi I and Pepi II, the same miracle appeared. Hundreds of utterances wrapping the burial chamber like a coded skin. For thousands of years, these pyramid texts had waited in the dark, a secret curriculum sealed away with dead kings. At first, the copying was chaotic, names, sketches, partial transcriptions. But in the 1960s and 70s, epigraphers launched systematic projects to record every sign, every damaged line, under controlled light. They mapped which spells appeared where, how sequences shifted from one king's pyramid to another. The result was not just translation, it was pattern recognition inside a stone library. Then the questions changed. If the words were this carefully placed, what about the architecture around them? Jump to the 21st century. Now, muon tomography, cosmic ray imaging, lets teams scan the Great Pyramid without lifting a single block. Ground-penetrating radar and micro-robots creep along ancient joints. Hidden voids, anomalous cavities, narrow corridors that go nowhere. The pyramids begin to look less like solid mountains and more like layered labyrinths. First, a low, tight entrance passage that forces the spine to bend. Then, an abrupt climb through an ascending corridor, still narrow, still pressing the shoulders, blind shafts that plunge into darkness, false doors carved into walls, leading only into the realm of symbols. Above, those famous air shafts from the king's and queen's chambers, not wide enough for a person, aimed with uncanny precision at circumpolar stars, the imperishable ones that never set. Most architects call these features symbolic or structural, ventilation, stress relief, decorative gestures. But what really happened if we read them differently? What if the whole interior is an embodied script, a ritual the body must perform? To enter is to descend, to be compressed, to lose the sky, to navigate turns and dead ends like the gates of the Duat. Then, at last, to emerge into the burial chamber, a still, resonant cube wrapped in green spells of dismemberment, ascent, and transformation into a star. In that moment, the space stops feeling like a static tomb and starts to resemble a training hall, a mystery school carved in stone, where pharaohs and perhaps select priests rehearse the journey of the soul. According to the stories, the dead king becomes an Ak among the imperishable stars. But standing in that chamber, surrounded by those texts, another possibility appears. What if this labyrinth was not only for the dead at all? Most importantly, what kind of initiation would require an entire pyramid as its classroom? We'll find out together when we follow the clues of sound, darkness, and the living body in these ancient schools of the afterlife. The deeper puzzle: why hide a map of eternity? What if this labyrinth was not only for the dead at all? Then another question hits even harder. It is one thing to carve prayers for protection, simple invocations, blessings for a safe passage. But did you know the pyramid texts are not just prayers? They are a detailed map of the underworld, a script for every stage of the king's journey. And that map was carved in a sealed chamber, in a pyramid that was closed forever. Why would a culture that built giant stone mountains to be seen by everyone hide its most important instructions where no one could read them? Most of us imagine sacred teachings being shared in open temples, chanted in public rituals. But old legends tell a different story about Egypt. Here, the most powerful knowledge was hidden in the darkest places. The walls around the king's sarcophagus are covered with more than 700 utterances, yet no ordinary person was ever meant to stand there and read them. So who were these texts really for? The dead king alone? The priests who memorized them? Or initiates training to step into the same path? One possibility is control. If only the pharaohs and high priests knew the exact spells, then they controlled the royal ideology of eternity. They could define who rose among the stars and who faded into shadow. Another possibility is fear. What if these were seen as dangerous technologies, rituals that could be misused? A spell that opens the gates of the Duat might not be something the priests wanted in every hand. According to the stories, some words were so charged they were considered forbidden for unprepared ears. Spoken aloud in the wrong mouth, they might lose their power or twist into something harmful. Imagine a culture convinced that sacred knowledge weakens when exposed to casual curiosity. In that mindset, secrecy is not selfishness. It is protection. Protection of the king, protection of the rituals, protection of the cosmic order itself. But then the deeper puzzle returns. What did the priests think the king was going to encounter that required such precise scripting? What kind of knowledge did they believe he needed in the very first hours after the heart stopped beating? Why did every line, every name of every gate and guardian matter so much that it had to be carved in stone? For thousands of years, these questions lay silent under collapsed masonry. Yet the logic of the secrecy points to something startling. The afterlife, to them, was not vague or dreamy. It was structured, rule-bound, technical. Most importantly, to understand why the texts were hidden, we have to understand what they describe. The Egyptian map of the Duat, the sequence of gates, the trials, the enemies, the helpers, and the final weighing of the heart. In their eyes, the king was not just lying in a coffin. He was entering a cosmic game with strict rules and terrifying penalties. So, in the next step of this journey, we leave the stone corridors behind. We'll find out together what that invisible landscape looked like. Close the pyramid doors in your mind. Let the torchlight go out, and begin to imagine the world the priests were really training for. A vast, dangerous kingdom beneath the horizon, where every word could mean survival or oblivion. Inside the Duat, Egypt's other world as a structured labyrinth. In that darkness, something else opens. Not a grave, a world. The Egyptians called it the Duat. Did you know this was not heaven above or hell below, but a vast hidden realm beneath the horizon, stretching under desert and sky, like a second Egypt made of night? To them, death was not an ending. It was an entrance into this other landscape, the secret backstage of creation, where the sun itself disappeared each evening. According to the stories, every night, the sun god Ra sailed into the Duat. He entered through a western gate, vanished from human sight, and began a 12-hour journey through the underworld. The pyramid texts hint at these hours and fields, long before later painted papyri drew them in color. They speak of regions with names that sound like coordinates. Cavern of knives, lake of fire, fields of reeds. A structured labyrinth, not chaos. Imagine this underground Egypt. The air is thick and cool. Total blackness is broken only by torch flames, by the glow of the solar bark, and by impossible stars that shine beneath the earth. Subterranean waters roar in invisible channels. There are lakes that burn, pools that freeze, and silent canals where a ferryman waits, or resting on a boat of cedar. The walls are lined with doors. Each door is a gate. Each gate has a name, and at every gate, a guardian. The texts describe gatekeepers with heads of lions, rams, or knives, serpents whose breath is fire, demons whose very gaze can unmake a soul. They do not just attack, they interrogate. Who are you? What is your name? What is the name of this gate? The correct answer is not a polite introduction. It is a spell, a password. Speak the wrong word, and the journey ends in that chamber of night. Most importantly, the Duat is not empty of gods. Osiris rules in its deepest halls, seated on a throne of green stone, surrounded by judges and record keepers. Here the heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at. Nearby, Ra passes in his bark, battling the serpent Apophis, whose endless coils try to choke the river of light. Between these powers, the dead king must move, not as a victim, but as a trained participant. What kind of knowledge would someone need to survive this maze? The pyramid texts answer: the knowledge to transform. The king's goal is to become an Ak, an effective one, a radiant, empowered being. He must unite with Ra in the solar boat, rising with the dawn, and at the same time join Osiris below, sharing in his dismemberment and rebirth. The texts speak of the king ascending to the imperishable stars of the northern sky, while also going down to sit beside Osiris, blending solar ascent with chthonic renewal. Old legends tell a different story from simple burial. They suggest this journey was rehearsed. Priests in the mystery schools recited these same lines in hidden chambers, training the pharaoh to hear the hiss of serpents, the rush of underworld rivers, the distant chanting of spirits, and to answer with the right words. But what really happened when those words were spoken in stone corridors on the surface? Could they open inner gates long before death? In the next part, we'll find out together how these Duat maps became a living ritual technology, turning pyramids into launch pads for the soul. Rules of the underworld, names, gates, and the weight of a word. Those maps were not just poetic images. They were rules. And in the pyramid texts, the first and most dangerous rule of the underworld is this: names have power. In Egyptian thought, a name was not a label. It was a living thread of identity. To know the true name of a being, whether a god, a gate, or a demon, was to touch its essence and, in a very real sense, to gain leverage over it. Did you know that many utterances in the pyramid texts are nothing but dense chains of names and epithets, line after line? O, you whose face is hidden. O, you who live on fire. O gate whose name is He who repels the unworthy. These were not decorations, they were keys. The Duat, as described in these early texts, is not an open plain. It is a labyrinth of thresholds. At each crossing, a gate waits, often with a strange, almost technical name. Behind it, a guardian, sometimes a serpent, sometimes a hybrid being with knives, sometimes a silent ferryman. The pattern repeats. The deceased must identify the gate by its secret name, address, or command the guardian correctly, and prove the right to pass. Old legends tell a different story than a gentle drift into heaven. Here, failure means delay, dismemberment, or outright annihilation. Most importantly, the power lies in exact speech. The texts often repeat the same phrases with tiny variations, as if the priests were testing every syllable. One utterance will say, "O doorleaf of the sky, whose name is flame," and another will swap a single epithet or direction. This obsession hints at a terrifying implication. Mispronounce a name, invert a title, omit one crucial line, and the soul could be trapped in a dead-end chamber of the Duat, circling a nightmarish cul-de-sac with no exit. So were these spells cheats, a way to hack the system of the afterlife? The pyramid texts suggest the opposite. They present the underworld as governed by Ma'at, order, truth, balance. The gates are not random obstacles, they are checkpoints of cosmic law. Knowing the right words is less like tricking a guard and more like entering the correct password into reality itself. Speak in harmony with Ma'at, and the gate recognizes that you belong where you are trying to go. Speak out of tune, and the universe simply does not open. For thousands of years, this secret language was reserved for pharaohs and the highest priests. According to the stories, only they had access to the full curriculum of names, gates, and ritual responses. If the afterlife is this rule-bound, and the rules are encoded in words, then training in those words becomes a matter of ultimate survival. But did these mystery schools really wait until death to begin the lesson? Or were the living already walking those hidden corridors in controlled, terrifying rehearsals we are only now beginning to reconstruct, rehearsing death while still breathing? They did not wait. That is the twist. The more we look at the evidence, the clearer it becomes. The journey mapped in the pyramid texts was not only a script for the dead, it was a rehearsal manual for the living. Kings, high priests, and select initiates were already walking the path of the Duat in controlled ritual settings, long before their hearts were weighed and their bodies sealed in stone. Did you know that some of the very utterances carved in Unis's pyramid echo lines used in temple rites centuries later? In this hidden curriculum, the pharaoh stood as chief initiate. Coronation was not just a political moment. It was staged as a death and rebirth. The old name symbolically died. The new king emerged as Horus made flesh, and rituals declared that he had ascended to the sky and sat among the imperishable stars. According to the stories, even while still breathing, the king was expected to become an Ak, a transfigured spirit, and to rule as someone who had already crossed the threshold and returned. Around him, high priests served as directors of this mystery drama. Each night, in the inner chambers of the great temples, they followed the sun god on his dangerous descent. They chanted as Ra entered the western horizon, passed through 12 gates, and battled the serpent of chaos in the deepest hour of darkness. At dawn, they welcomed his rebirth in the east, mirroring the very cycle the dead king hoped to ride. Most importantly, these were not abstract myths to them. They were rehearsals of the cosmic journey itself. This is where memorization and performance become crucial. The pyramid texts preserve more than 700 utterances, but on the walls they appear without illustrations, as if the images were already engraved in the minds of the priests. Old legends tell a different story than silent stone. Whispered lines, antiphonal chants, and carefully timed responses. The words we now see frozen in greenish hieroglyphs were once living speech, learned by heart, recited in darkness, and repeated until they shaped the inner landscape of the initiate. Imagine one of those nocturnal rituals. The temple is closed to the public. Only torches and oil lamps flicker against carved pillars. In the sanctuary, a sealed chamber opens, and the veiled statue of a god is brought forth on a sled. Priests circle it, breathing in incense so thick it blurs the edges of the room. The opening of the mouth ritual begins. A ceremonial blade touches lips and eyes as voices rise, words to awaken, to feed, to restore. Some of those lines later appear, almost unchanged, in the pyramid texts. Spells to open the mouth of the dead king, to let him breathe, speak, and eat among the gods. Where does ritual end and afterlife script begin? Here is the deeper secret. By enacting these spells in life, the initiate could preview the Duat. Through trance, symbolic burial, and guided recitation, the terrifying unknown became a mapped territory. The names of gates, the passwords of guardians, the sequence of transformations, all were practiced until the soul could walk them almost automatically. But what really happened in those moments, when the chanting stopped and the torches went out, were some of these priests using the body as a launch pad for real journeys beyond the veil. We'll find out together as we follow the trail from stone-carved spells to altered states of consciousness in the next chambers of this mystery. The king who eats the gods. Forbidden doctrine in the cannibal hymn. To answer that, we have to walk into one of the strangest chambers in all of Egypt's spiritual technology. Buried in the ruined pyramid of Unas at Saqqara is a spell so violent, so unsettling, that later priests almost pretended it did not exist. Did you know the oldest Book of the Dead on earth includes a hymn where the king eats the gods? This is the Cannibal Hymn, utterances 273 and 274 of the pyramid texts. Here, the dead pharaoh is not a humble petitioner begging for mercy in the afterlife. He is a hunter, a predator among the stars. The texts call him a bull of the sky, roaming the heavens, chasing down the gods as if they were cattle scattered across the night. The lines are shockingly vivid. The king seizes the gods, binds the gods, and slaughters their eldest. Their hearts and livers are torn out and roasted on a divine fire. Their magic, their life force, their very names become his meal. One passage proclaims that the king feeds on their magic. He devours their spirits until no single deity can match him. By consuming them all, he becomes more powerful than any one of them. On the surface, this sounds like pure nightmare, a cosmic cannibal loose in the sky. But what really happened in the minds of the priests who carved these words? Were they imagining a bloodthirsty tyrant, or encoding a forbidden doctrine about consciousness and power? Most importantly, the cannibal hymn seems to describe assimilation, not literal cannibalism. The king does not eat flesh as we understand it. He eats qualities. He devours wisdom, strength, magic. In other words, the initiate must internalize the entire pantheon. Every god becomes a force within. Every power of the cosmos is taken into the self, integrated, and then transcended. In this reading, the pharaoh is not just one more child of the gods. He is a living convergence point of all divine currents. Old legends tell a different story than the gentle, orderly Egypt we see in museum glass. Here, the path to divinity is dangerous. It means symbolically killing the limitations of each separate god form and rising as something new. This is exactly what many mystery schools describe: an initiate who dies to an old identity and awakens as a composite being, a self made of many powers, many names. According to the stories, only a tightly controlled elite could be trusted with rituals like this. What kind of knowledge would it be to tell someone they could surpass the gods themselves? For thousands of years, these lines stayed hidden in the dark, carved where almost no living eyes would see them. If this is what the priests were willing to encode for the king, cosmic hunting, dismemberment, and divine consumption, what else did they hide in those walls? In the next chambers of this mystery, we'll find out together what the texts say about being torn apart, put back together, and the terrifying first minutes after death, ladders of light and ritual mouths. How spells became actions. Those violent images of tearing and eating were only one side of the mystery. In the same chambers, another set of spells describes something very different. Climbing, rising, waking up. Utterance 213 is one of the most haunting. The king is called to ascend a ladder of light into the sky, with Horus at one side and Seth at the other. Enemies turned rungs of support. Did you know the text literally speaks of a stairway to the sky, set up for the pharaoh so he can walk into the imperishable stars? It sounds poetic. But what really happened when these words were spoken in the dark? Imagine priests in a narrow chamber, torches low, a wooden ladder leaning against the stone. The king's wrapped body, or perhaps his statue, is slowly raised, rung by rung, as the utterance is chanted. Each step matches a line, each pause marks a gate. For thousands of years, readers assumed this was only metaphor. Yet the pyramid texts keep returning to ladders, stairways, and celestial ramps, as if describing a practiced sequence rather than a passing image. According to the stories preserved in later temple rituals, initiates did not just hear these words, they moved with them. A priest might guide the living king or a candidate in training through a visionary ascent, instructing him to see each rung as a level of the sky. First the realm of the earth gods, then the circumpolar stars, then the hidden domain of the Aku, the shining ones. Every step, a shift in consciousness, rehearsed inside stone chambers that blocked out the ordinary world. Other utterances turn this invisible training into direct action. Take Utterance 302, one of the seeds of what later became the famous opening of the mouth ritual. Here the texts speak of opening the king's mouth and eyes so he can eat, speak, and see in the afterlife. At first, these are just carved lines, but over time they become a full technical ritual, performed on statues and mummies, with adzes, incense, and precise gestures to restore the senses beyond death. We start to see a pattern. A spell appears in the pyramid texts as a spoken formula. Centuries later, that same formula has grown into a complex temple performance. The words did not stay trapped in theory. They were turned into repeatable procedures, a curriculum of embodied afterlife technology. Most importantly, the priests treated sound and stone as partners. In life, these utterances were chanted, whispered, or thundered in the dark, timed with movement, touch, and breath. In death, the same sequences were frozen in hieroglyphs around the sarcophagus, so the walls themselves could speak for a silent body. The king lay at the center of a stone library of commands, surrounded by a script he had already rehearsed. For an initiate, learning these utterances was not just memorizing lines, it was training the tongue to utter names without fear, the eyes to see in pitch blackness, the subtle body to climb ladders no one else could see. Old legends tell a different story from simple tomb building. These were schools where one practiced being dead while still alive. But if these were lessons, who exactly was allowed to enroll, and what happened to those who failed the climb? In the next chamber of this mystery, we'll find out together. Through 12 gates, the king's ongoing journey. If those climbs were lessons, then the pyramid texts are the exam the king cannot afford to fail, because once the body lies still, the real journey begins, through gate after gate, threshold after threshold, in a landscape where a single wrong word can erase a soul. Did you know that even before the famous illustrated books of the dead, these early texts already hint at a hidden architecture of the afterlife? They do not lay out a neat map of 12 painted gates like we see in later tombs. Instead, they scatter a spine of sequences. The king comes to a door, meets a guardian, faces a demand. A ferryman refuses his boat. A serpent bars the path. A celestial ladder appears, but only for one who knows how to call it by name. Again and again, the same pattern repeats. The king encounters a gate or a being. He is challenged. Who are you? Where do you come from? What is my name? Then a precise formula follows. He recites the secret name of the gatekeeper. He identifies the star to which he belongs. He declares, "I know the ways of the sky," or "I know the hearts of the gods." And when the answer is correct, reality itself seems to unlock. The guardian steps aside. The river opens. The king receives a reward, safe passage, wings of a falcon, a boat of the sky, or a shining star body that carries him to the next realm. This is not vague piety, it is technical mastery. The pharaoh is trained to be the one who knows the names, knows the places, knows the paths of the Duat. According to the stories, knowing a name was not just recognizing a label. It meant holding the essence, the inner pattern of a being. To speak it correctly, with the right tone and in the right chamber, was a ritual act that forced the underworld to respond. For thousands of years, priests guarded these utterances as a secret curriculum. Many of the sequences end abruptly with phrases like, "and he goes forth," "and he ascends to the sky," or "and he proceeds on his way." Then the wall simply stops. No explanation, no illustration, just a sense that the written spell is only one doorway in a much longer, perhaps oral, journey that continued in darkness, enchanted rituals, and in the inner vision of the initiate. Most importantly, when we read these carved lines today, we are not just looking at ancient poetry. We are stepping into the first movements of a training, once spread over many nights of recitation and many years of preparation. Old legends tell a different story from passive burial. Pharaohs and their closest priests rehearsed these encounters in hidden chambers, learning how to meet fear, how to answer the gate, how to transform on command. But what really happened when those same formulas were whispered at the moment of death? And who else, beyond the king, was allowed to walk that path? In the next passage of this mystery, we'll find out together. When royal secrets leaked, from pyramid texts to coffin texts, those royal rehearsals inside pyramid chambers were meant for a tiny circle. But what really happened when the old royal order collapsed, and the same forbidden map of the Duat began leaking out of the king's stone cocoon? After the end of the Old Kingdom, Egypt went through chaos, famine, and political breakdown. Central power shattered. Local governors, not distant pharaohs, controlled the provinces. And in this new world, something astonishing appears on the scene. The coffin texts. Instead of being carved high on the inner walls of pyramids, the spells begin to show up on wooden coffins belonging to officials, local rulers, and wealthy commoners. Did you know that by the Middle Kingdom, the sacred script of the king's journey was literally wrapped around the dead in painted bands of hieroglyphs? Many of these coffin texts are instantly familiar. Line after line echoes the pyramid text utterances, the same invocations to the sky, the same pleas to avoid decapitation, drowning, or being devoured in the Duat. But there is change, as well as continuity. Spells are rearranged, combined, and expanded. New scenes of fairies, lakes of fire, and mysterious gates appear. The core map is the same, but the route has been redrawn, as if the priests were updating an old star chart for a wider audience. Most importantly, the hero of the script has changed. In the pyramid texts, the Eye is the king, the unique son of Ra, destined to ascend as an imperishable star. In the coffin texts, the speaker can be a woman from a provincial town, a middle-ranking scribe, a local noble. The name slot is left open to be filled with whoever lies inside the box. The possibility of becoming an Ak, an effective luminous spirit who can navigate the Duat with knowledge in hand, has been democratized, at least for those who could afford these decorated wooden chambers. So what kind of knowledge was now being sold, copied, and customized? Temple scribes, once guardians of a tightly sealed royal liturgy, are suddenly writing the same once hidden formulas on dozens, even hundreds of coffins. They adapt old spells into books of the two ways, complete with diagrammatic maps on coffin floors showing two winding routes through the underworld. Old legends tell a different story, but the coffins themselves suggest a very practical business. Pay the right priests, and the gates of the afterlife open to you as well. Was this a shift in theology, an economic opportunity, or both? According to the stories carved in wood and ink, the gods still judge, the heart is still weighed, the journey is still dangerous. But now, the idea that only pharaohs could pass those gates has been quietly broken. When secret manuals escape the palace and spread through the provinces, does their power fade, or do they begin to reshape an entire civilization's imagination of death? In the next chapter of this mystery, we'll find out together. Papyrus for the people, the Book of the Dead, and the echo of the pyramids. And once that barrier breaks, the entire landscape changes. In the New Kingdom, a new kind of manual appears in the tombs. The Egyptians called it the Book of Coming Forth by Day. Today, we call it the Book of the Dead. Did you know this was no longer carved only for pharaohs in hidden stone chambers, but written on rolls of papyrus that merchants, scribes, and even skilled artisans could commission for their own journey? The mystery curriculum had gone mobile. At first glance, it looks like a different book, flexible sheets instead of granite, ink instead of chisels, personal names swapped in, scenes tailored to a specific life. But what really happened beneath that surface change? When we compare the spells, a striking continuity appears. Many chapters of the Book of the Dead are direct descendants of the old pyramid texts and the intermediate coffin texts. The same ferryman waits at the same dark canal. The same gatekeepers demand that the soul recite their hidden names. The same underworld geography of gates, lakes, and fiery caverns unfolds line by line. According to the stories preserved in these papyri, knowledge is still everything. A spell might instruct the deceased to say, I know you. I know your name. I know the name of your gate. These are almost word-for-word echoes of utterances, first carved for Unas and Pepi, now copied, edited, and repackaged. The priests have not abandoned their old syllabus. They have expanded the enrollment. But there is another shift, and it is visual. The pyramid texts are pure sound and meaning, invisible rituals frozen as lines of hieroglyphs on stone. The Book of the Dead surrounds those words with images. Suddenly, we see painted scenes of the Duat, boats gliding along subterranean rivers, serpents coiled around islands of flame, rows of mysterious gates, each with its own guardian. Most importantly, we see the weighing of the heart before the scales of Ma'at, the feather of truth balanced against the core of a human life. This is more than decoration. It is like turning a secret lecture into a picture book for the soul. For thousands of years, only priests inside dark temples would have visualized these trials. Now the scroll itself becomes a guided tour, a storyboard of the afterlife that the deceased can walk through in consciousness. The manual is no longer bolted to a royal chamber. It travels with the body, wrapped beside the mummy, ready to be unrolled in the mind at each critical gate. Old legends tell a different story about progress. We imagine knowledge becoming simpler as it spreads. Here, the opposite happens. The texts multiply, the images grow richer, the rituals become more layered. What kind of school is this, where graduation happens after death and the final exam is taken in the dark? And if the Book of the Dead is the popular edition of a once forbidden syllabus, what deeper, even more secret textbooks might still be missing from the archaeological record? Other labyrinths, other initiates, echoes across cultures. What deeper, even more secret textbooks might still be missing from the archaeological record? To glimpse the answer, we have to step outside Egypt for a moment. Because this idea of a hidden curriculum about death is not unique. Across the Mediterranean, other mystery schools were quietly teaching their own maps of the afterlife. Different gods, different symbols, but the same strange confidence that the soul could be trained. Take the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece. For thousands of years, initiates traveled to a sanctuary outside Athens to enact a secret drama of descent and return. Publicly, it was a festival for Demeter and Persephone. Privately, behind closed doors, people underwent rituals that were said to remove the fear of death. No one was allowed to reveal what they saw. Yet ancient writers hint at torches in dark halls, sacred drinks, and a moment of blinding revelation when the initiate saw the underworld and came back changed. Then there are the Orphic gold tablets, thin sheets of gold buried on the chests of the dead in Greek and Italian graves. On them, in tiny letters, are instructions for the soul, which spring to drink from, which guardians to address, which exact phrases to speak. Did you know some of them even begin with, "I am a child of earth and starry sky"? It sounds uncannily like the pyramid texts, telling the pharaoh he is a star in the northern sky, called by name through hidden gates. Later, in Hermetic and Gnostic writings, the pattern appears again. The soul ascends through planetary spheres, meeting powers and archons at each level. To pass, it must give names, passwords, or signs. Old legends tell a different story on the surface, about gods, planets, and eons. But structurally, the script is familiar. graded initiation, secret names, symbolic death, and a guided return. So what kind of knowledge are we looking at here? In all these schools, there is a hidden syllabus guarded by priests or hierophants. There are levels of initiation. There are rehearsals of dying, often in darkness, often with sound, chant, or visionary images. And most importantly, there is a belief that the afterlife is not random. It is a navigable journey with rules. This is where Egypt steps back into the center. The pyramid texts may be the earliest extensive written example of this entire pattern. A codified royal map of the Duat, carved in secret chambers, spoken by priests, then slowly diffused into coffin texts, and, much later, the Book of the Dead. According to the stories, later philosophers and magicians came to Egypt to learn. But what really happened in that exchange? We should be careful here. It is tempting to say the Greeks simply borrowed everything. The truth is likely more complex. Human beings everywhere meet the same mystery of death, and similar strategies can arise independently. Passwords, guides, ritual rehearsals. Yet Egypt's incredibly early, detailed corpus makes it hard to imagine that later Mediterranean, esoteric thought developed in complete isolation. And that leaves us with an uncomfortable question. If so many civilizations built entire mystery schools around practicing death, what were they all sensing about consciousness and its journey that we, in a secular age, tend to ignore? What if the pharaohs, the Greek initiates, and the Gnostic visionaries were all touching the same hidden corridor of the mind, one that modern culture barely admits exists? In the next section, we'll step back into the pyramid and ask whether these ancient rehearsals of dying might leave traces we can still measure today in the body and the brain. Walking the corridors today, reading the walls as an initiate. So, let's go back in. Not in a tour group with flash photography and railings, but as an initiate, walking into a training ground for the afterlife. Imagine we're standing again at Saqqara, at the ruined pyramid of Unas. The desert light is harsh, almost blinding. Then, we step through the low entrance, and everything changes. The sound of the wind cuts off, the air cools, the passage slopes down, and the ceiling presses closer to our heads with every step. How far would you go into the dark for a promise of survival after death? Our eyes adjust. The beam of a single lamp slides over limestone blocks. At first, it looks like ordinary stone. Then the walls begin to glitter. Every surface is alive with tiny, carved signs. Falcons, stars, ankhs, coiled serpents. For thousands of years, these corridors were sealed. The oldest book of the dead on earth, hidden in plain stone. We emerge into the burial chamber. Above the massive stone sarcophagus, the ceiling is painted with blue and gold stars. Around us, the pyramid texts run in dense columns, over 700 utterances. But here, as initiates, we focus on a few. On one wall, a spell speaks directly to the king's body. It lists his arms, his legs, his fingers, his bones, commanding that none be taken, none be cut. In a world where dismemberment meant spiritual extinction, this is not poetry, it is a defensive ritual, a legal contract shouted into the Duat. His limbs are gathered, his body is whole. Can you feel how precise that sounds? When death is imagined as a battlefield, we turn, and another utterance launches the king into motion. Here, Unas is given a boat, not a symbolic toy, but a fully equipped vessel of words, complete with oarsmen and a pilot, ready to cross the celestial waters. Without this ritual boat, the soul would be stranded. With it, the journey can continue through the gates of the night sky. Then, the tone sharpens. A serpent appears in the text, named and identified. The spell does not beg, it commands. The snake is ordered to stand down, to turn its venom away, to become harmless. Did you know that in Egyptian magic, naming a danger was already half the victory? Most of us grew up thinking of inscriptions as static, like labels in a museum, but old legends tell a different story. According to the stories, these were living scripts, prompts, cues, call and response lines in an invisible drama unfolding in the Duat, with the dead king as protagonist and the priests as scriptwriters and directors. In life, they rehearsed these lines in dark chambers. In death, the walls remembered them when the voice could not. Listen to the emotional mix here. Because the king is promised a place among the circumpolar stars. Danger, because every gate hides a guardian, every river hides a threat. Reassurance, because for each terror there is a matching phrase, a precise operation to keep panic at bay by giving the soul something to do, say, and remember. What kind of knowledge treats fear not as an enemy, but as a signal that a new ritual is needed? But these carvings hide a deeper secret. Most importantly, they assume there is a part of a person that can learn, adapt, and navigate even after the heart has stopped. The Ka, the Ba, the Ach, these are not just poetic names, but different players in the drama. So what exactly did the priests think was traveling those corridors of stone and starlight? In the next section, we'll follow that question into modern labs and brain scans, and ask whether their forbidden curriculum was really about geography and monsters, or about the hidden architecture of consciousness itself. What the priests may have really been training. When we pull all these threads together, a strange picture starts to emerge. Did you know the Egyptians did not imagine just one soul, but an entire constellation of selves that had to be trained, aligned, and protected? Most of us grow up thinking of a person as a body and a ghost, but old legends tell a different story along the Nile. The Ka was the vital double, the life force that needed food and offerings. The Ba was the mobile soul, a bird with a human head that could fly between worlds. The Ren was the name, the spoken identity that could keep someone alive for thousands of years. The Shut was the shadow, a dark imprint that followed and remembered. And above all of these stood the Ak, the transfigured, luminous spirit the pyramid texts obsessively try to create out of a dead king. In those hidden chambers, the priests were not only mapping an underworld, they were shaping a person. Utterance after utterance tells the pharaoh, "You are this star, you are this god, you are this name." Why repeat it? Because, according to the stories, the Duat was full of forces that could slice, scatter, or erase. Serpents that bite away memory, gates that demand the correct title, waters that dissolve form. The real danger was not just being lost in strange geography, but being broken apart from within. So the rituals read like training manuals for identity under pressure. The king is taught to remember every one of his names, to call back his ba, to anchor his ka, to guard his ren from being scratched out. Most importantly, to pass through each trial without forgetting, I am an ak. I belong among the imperishable stars. In modern language, these forbidden texts sound almost psychological. Imagine entering a radically altered state of consciousness, whether through trauma, near death, deep trance, or visionary experience. The normal sense of self starts to fragment. Time stretches. Familiar landmarks fall away. The pyramid texts function like a guided script for that moment, a way of maintaining coherence and agency when everything else dissolves. They coach the pharaoh to stay lucid in the storm. That may be why so many spells are spoken in the first person, present tense, as if rehearsed in life. This was not only about a corpse on a stone bed. It was about practicing, again and again, how to let go of one form while holding on to a deeper center. We may not believe in literal, serpent-guarded gates, but what kind of knowledge is encoded here about facing crisis, about meeting the unknown without collapsing into fear? The Egyptian answer was preparation. Train the heart, train the mind. Rehearse your own disappearance until it no longer feels like annihilation, but passage. When we study these forbidden inscriptions today, we are not just peeking at ancient superstition carved in green stone. We are watching a civilization attempt to solve the same riddle that haunts hospital rooms and quiet bedrooms now. How do you cross the unknown without losing yourself? In the next section, we'll see how that question echoes in modern research on near-death experiences and consciousness, and ask whether the priests of Saqqara were exploring a frontier science of the soul long before brain scans and monitors ever flickered to life. Leaving the pyramid, your next step on the path, and ask whether the priests of Saqqara were exploring a frontier science of the soul long before brain scans and monitors ever flickered to life. Now, as we step back from those green glowing walls in Unis's pyramid, look at the path we've walked together. We began with those hidden hieroglyphs carved where no sunlight enters, whispering the first great map of the Egyptian afterlife. From there, we followed the king through the Duat, past rivers of darkness, through guarded gates, toward the eastern horizon where a new sun waits. We watched the pharaoh climb a ladder of light, rung by rung, becoming an Akh, a shining being among the stars. We listened as the stone itself seemed to speak around the sarcophagus, each surface a voice, each spell a line in a script for crossing the unknown. And then came the most shocking moment of all, the cannibal hymn, where the king does not just join the gods, but consumes them, taking their power into his own immortal body. Did you know that this was only the beginning? Those same utterances slowly leaked out of the royal pyramids and into the coffin texts, painted inside wooden boxes for nobles. Later, they unfolded again as the Book of the Dead, written on papyrus and tucked beside farmers, artisans, and scribes. For thousands of years, the curriculum of the afterlife spread from one small stone chamber at Saqqara into the lives of ordinary people. When we look at it this way, the pyramids stop being just giant tombs. They become stone classrooms, silent libraries, vaults for a royal training program in how to die consciously and rise again. The priests are no longer just mortuary workers. They are initiators and script keepers, guarding a syllabus of forbidden names, passwords, and rituals that only the prepared were allowed to hear. Imagine one of those priests in a darkened hall long before the burial. No tourists, no cameras, only flickering lamps and the echo of his own voice as he recites the same spells carved above the king's sarcophagus. According to the stories, these were words that could open gates in the Duat itself. Old legends tell a different story than simple funeral prayers. They hint at living initiates rehearsing their own deaths, line by line. So here is the question to carry with you as we leave the pyramid tonight. If your inner walls could be inscribed with a script for your own journey beyond this life, what would you want written there? What kind of knowledge, what memories, what promises, what names would you choose to guide you when everything familiar falls away? Most importantly, what would you not want to forget? Share that in the comments if you feel called to. Think of it as joining a modern circle of initiates scattered around the world, but sitting in the same invisible chamber, comparing notes on the same ancient riddle. And this is only one level of the mystery. Next, we'll leave the pyramids and step into the temples, into hidden initiation rooms, into the weighing of the heart before Mart's feather, into the secret night rituals of Osiris at Abydos. Were these places training grounds for the living soul just as precise as any pyramid? We'll find out together. So subscribe, like, and stay with this journey as we keep decoding Egypt's forgotten schools of the afterlife.